Okay, Larry, it's time for the theme song.
Yeah, Bob. What do I do?
Let's see. I know. You play the guitar.
Bob, I don't have any hands.
Oh, you're right. Well, okay. Well, you play this.
I don't want to play that. I'll look silly.
Oh, come on. It'll be fun.
Nope. Not gonna do it.
It's for the kids.
Oh, okay. But they better not laugh.
All right. Better get on out there.
A few months ago, I got nostalgic for, of all things, VeggieTales. And it got me to thinking, whatever happened to it? You know, VeggieTales, that Christian cartoon with the CG vegetables, who would reenact stories from the Bible. Well, I looked into it, and what I discovered was one of the most disastrous failures of a studio in animation history. Folks, have I got a story for you. I thought that VeggieTales fell in popularity because they removed God from the reboots. Something about NBC and Netflix downplaying the religious stuff. And that's why VeggieTales failed, right? Oh, guys. Oh, there is so much more to it than that. On one hand, you have a show that was truly groundbreaking on multiple levels. VeggieTales was the most successful Christian children's franchise of all time, and was also the most successful direct-to-video series in history. There was even a time when it was one of the most popular kids' video series in the world, and was only second to Pokemon. I guess Pikachu was a little too strong. On top of that, VeggieTales was also a trailblazer when it came to the world of animation, and was one of the earliest computer animated franchises. Their first episode came out in December of 1993, 2 years before Toy Story. I mean, we're talking about a show that was so popular that even non-Christian people would happily watch it. Believe me when I say, that's incredibly rare. More often than not, secular audiences don't really partake in Christian content. I mean, to which I can't imagine why. It's so good. Don't you want to watch Bible Man?
As Bible Man.
What the was that?
But despite the accomplishments of VeggieTales, it also suffered some devastating defeats. Again, I thought that removing God from the series was the only thing that ruined it. No, let me get the list. There was poor management, massive layoffs, failed spin-offs, unfair distribution deals, creating a movie that cost twice its original budget, bankruptcy, lawsuits, and ultimately, broken dreams. And whose dreams were these? Well, that would be Phil Vischer, the creator of Big Idea Entertainment and VeggieTales. This guy was taken for a ride, for an absolute ride, and essentially had his creation ripped from his arms. Seriously, I have never felt more pity for a person in the animation industry than Phil. But Phil is very open about his downfall, and even wrote a book about it. It's called Me, Myself, and Bob. A book that was so informative and good that I read it twice. No joke. This is the hardest I've ever gone researching a topic. I mean, I grew up with VeggieTales, and it means a lot to me. I rewatched the episodes, listened to the soundtrack. I got to interview Phil. I strictly ate meat for the past 5 months just to be safe. And I even bought these puppets of the characters from eBay. Because I actually don't know. I felt a calling. I just, like they were whispering my name.
Saberspark, come out and play.
So let's take a closer look at what ruined VeggieTales. When it comes to the fall of VeggieTales, no one played a bigger role than that of Phil Vischer, the creator of the show. Now, for the record, there's a co-creator named Mike Naraki, but we'll get to him in a bit. For now, let's talk about Phil and how this quiet, nerdy kid would go on to make history. And what better place to start than the very beginning?
In the beginning, God created the...
Phil was born in June of 1966 in Muscatine, Iowa, and belonged to a very Christian family. Sunday service, Sunday school, Awanas, the works. Heck, Phil's great-grandfather on his mother's side was a famous radio preacher, the Reverend R.R. Brown of Omaha, Nebraska, which, let's be real here, sounds like a rapper's name. He's spitting those biblical rhymes with fire and brimstone. And you better believe if you're passing me that auxiliary chord in 1923, we're gonna be listening to RRR. Phil was a weird kid. His words, not mine. He said he loved to build things, watch TV, and that he had no shortage of weird thoughts. Thoughts that he would share and would get him in trouble with Sunday school teachers. They saw Phil as a class clown and warned his parents of his behavior. According to him, he didn't want to disappoint his parents, so he became very quiet instead, but still had these weird thoughts dancing around his head. Instead of hanging out with other kids, Phil would play with puppets and would experiment with his family's video equipment by making stop-motion films with his toys. But when Phil turned 9 years old, something happened that would heavily impact him. His parents got divorced. This truly shook Phil to his core, and the ramifications of his parents' failed marriage would follow him for the rest of his life. It would even play a role in the rise and fall of VeggieTales. Legit, something broke in Phil the day his father left the family, and Phil would never look at relationships the same way again. Why trust people when they could just leave your life? Just so you know, divorce is a very big theme in this story, so keep that in mind as we move along. Phil would remain with his mother and his siblings as he grew up, but the family moved to Glen Ellyn, Illinois following the divorce. That's where Phil would spend his high school years and would continue to advance his skills in movie making and special effects. As a matter of fact, Phil was quickly realizing that he had a real talent and passion for understanding how things worked, specifically with films. Movies, such as Star Wars and Tron, heavily inspired him to pursue this path and to see where computers and programming could take him. He even taught himself how to use mathematical equations to make a ball bounce on his Atari 400. According to Phil, quote, "Computers were infinitely reliable, unlike people. And then it arrived. MTV was a game changer, both for television and for Phil.
See new video music you can't see anywhere else. New contests, new specials, new guest VJs, new news."
He was blown away by the creative aspect of MTV and what it was bringing to the table. Music videos and content that broke all the rules. To an artist like Phil, it was a revelation. To a Christian like Phil, it was more like the Book of Revelation. Pelvic thrusting, curves on woman, Beavis and head. Phil was very alarmed at the ethical implications of MTV and what the channel was broadcasting into the very homes of red-blooded Americans. The soul of the nation was now at risk, and MTV was the catalyst that made Phil realize what his purpose in life would be: to use filmmaking as a way to reach out to people and bring them closer to God. It would be both his job and his ministry. And how did Phil begin this journey? By dropping out of college. He went to St. Paul Bible College for 3 semesters, but then was kicked out for failing chapel. Phil, dude, how did you fail chapel? All you gotta do is read the Bible out loud. Here, I'll do it. In the beginning, Gosh created the... In the beginning, Gosh created the In the beginning, Gosh created the heavens and the... it's not Gosh, is it? In the beginning, Gosh created the heavens... son of a... But college was not a complete loss for Phil, for it was there that he met the future co-creator of VeggieTales, Mike Naraki. The two were on a puppet team at the college and would go to churches and nursing homes to put on shows. Puppets. Oh God. Oh my God. Uh-oh. They would even write scripts together, to which one would become the future basis for a VeggieTales short called The Forgive-O-Matic. Needless to say, Phil and Mike really clicked, but both of them would fail college and eventually went their separate ways. But of course, only for a bit. Their paths would eventually cross in the near future. But in the meanwhile, Phil here needed a job and went back to the suburbs of Chicago to search for one. So Phil was now a college dropout and was on the hunt for a job. In 1985, he found one at a Christian video production company in Chicago. There, he would duplicate VHS cassettes. Remember those? And he would work the graveyard shift. But according to Phil, he preferred that. He got to be alone and could spend his free time at work reading up on other equipment and teaching himself how it works. As a matter of fact, that's how he became a video editor. In 1986, the first wave of computer-animated companies started to arrive and were being hired to create commercials for companies. Well, it turns out that Phil's boss wanted to get in on this growing market and bought something called the Bosch FGS 4000, one of the first commercially available computer animation systems. Phil's boss even paid to train him to understand the equipment. Around this time, Mike came back into the picture and joined up at Phil's company. Soon after that, the boss made the decision to move the office into the heart of Chicago, and Phil and Mike both decided to move downtown with it. So there you have Phil and Mike, two young guys working at a production company in Chicago. But then they had the idea to make their own little project on the side called A Day at the Beach. It featured Phil and Mike wearing sunglasses as they drove a banana car through a cartoon world, and a bunch of other silly antics. In a way, if you replace Phil and Mike for Bob and Larry, you're kind of looking at the very first VeggieTales film. But after 3 years of working at the production company, Phil decided that it was time to set off and launch his own business. He wanted to play a larger role when it came to the creative process and marketing of a company. In February of 1989, Phil launched VeggieTales Studios and started to look for business opportunities and clients to work with. Now, a big challenge Phil initially faced was affording equipment. So he struck a deal with another production company, where he would buy time to use their equipment, but at night. But then a certain someone entered Phil's life. Someone very special. Lisa. Lisa and Phil originally met at a Bible conference and really hit it off. Like, really well. Cause the two got married after dating for 2 years? And then they had a kid on the way. And to make matters worse, Phil was broke. But money isn't everything.
Bite your tongue. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But real talk, Phil and Lisa really clicked. It turns out that Lisa's parents were also divorced. So the two were able to relate over that. In the book, Phil says that his successful marriage with Lisa is his greatest achievement in life. Which, let's be real here, is really saying something. Since Phil wrote this amazing song.
Everybody got a water buffalo. Yours is fast, but mine is slow. Oh, where'd you get them?
And that's hard to top. So life was starting to pile up for Phil. But folks, believe me, this was just the beginning. At this point of the story, we're going through the fun underdog phase. Just wait till we get to the real drama. Phil said in his book that computer animation would be the key to his storytelling. But he also knew how difficult that path would be. He even considered going the live-action route and copying the successes of other Christian shows like McGee and Me, which, to be fair, had some animated segments too. By the way, folks, I watched an episode of this, and it is the most 1990s show ever made. It's like what Horsing Around was making fun of. Around this time, McGee and Me was the talk of the Christian town, and was the show to beat. It was very popular in Christian bookstores, and was handled by Focus on the Family and Tyndall House Productions. But Phil here thought, maybe I can do better. Maybe, just maybe, I can produce my own half-hour-long computer-animated home video. A chance for him to create art and launch his ministry. I mean, how hard could it be?
That's one fine-looking
ministry.
Why doesn't mine look like that? Ah!
In early 1990, Phil kicked things up with his pursuit of computer animation and decided to go to SIGGRAPH, which stands for Special Interest Group on Graphics and Interactive Technologies. It was basically a convention for folks who want to discuss and showcase computer graphics. There were lots of big people from the industry there, but the biggest takeaway for Phil was the introduction of a brand new technique called lattice deformation. It allowed animation models to stretch and squash as they moved. Folks, this was a game changer for the animation industry and especially for Phil. Even Pixar's old animated shorts did not have this kind of animation. But Phil's could. He decided to get his hands on this new animation software and make his half-hour-long film. He would just have to make sure that he had compelling, yet simple characters to work alongside the software. Something without limbs. So during the day, Phil would do work for his clients, and then at night, he would focus on making his kids' show. The only problem? Haha, it's always a problem, isn't it?
Money.
The software Phil needed cost around $25,000. But his stepfather was kind enough to lend him the money for the program. Phil got lucky, but still had quite the road ahead of him. He had a wife, he had a kid on the way, and he had a small business that was hanging on by a thread. But he was optimistic. He got to test out the lattice deformation for a client, and they absolutely loved it. Phil then made his own character for a test run and created Nerf Ball Guy, which was a total success.
That ain't right.
But then he realized that he needed characters that were even more simple. Monopod bodies, no arms, no legs. If there was going to be any effort on these characters, it was going to be focused on their eyes. And that was a brilliant decision, considering that most CG characters at the time had rigid eyes that lacked expression. Phil wanted to capture the cartoony eyes from the old days of animation, like with Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny. It is legit amazing that the limitations Phil faced would actually provide a solution that would make his characters truly stand out. And now we get to the part where the magic begins. Wait, magic? No, that's witchcraft! So Phil had the technology and a rough idea of what he wanted to do. Now he just needed to finalize his characters. What about, talking candy? Yeah, hey, that could work. Hold it, said Lisa Vischer. You know, moms are going to be mad if you make their kids fall in love with candy bars. Dun, 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 dun. Oh my, she's right, said Phil. Talking vegetables would be much more palatable. So Phil decided to create a cucumber character, who he nicknamed Mr. Cuke. Ah, sweet! An early version of Larry. It was like part of his evolutionary process.
Agumon, what Digivolve
Phil and Mike also started to brainstorm stories for the show, and thought about doing spoofs on classic literature, like The Grapes of Wrath. And it would be Mike who came up with the name for the show. Phil then went to a company called David C. Cook to see if they wanted to invest in the production of VeggieTales. Now, they liked the test footage of Mr. Cuke, but they were only interested in selling the show, not funding it. Phil then went to Tyndall House, and they said the same thing. No dice. Phil was really starting to feel the burn. His kid finally arrived, but he barely had any money. Despite this, he was determined to push on with VeggieTales, and saw it as a call from God. And here's an interesting fun fact. Phil actually pitched VeggieTales to Nickelodeon back in the day, when they're on the hunt for their first 3 Nicktoons. They considered the idea, but ultimately said no. "We don't do computer animation," Jimmy Neutron laughing in the distance. Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Yet, but Phil finally came up with Bob the Tomato, and officially had his veggie duo ready to go. Heck, Phil would even go on to voice Bob, and Mike would voice Larry. After that, the two put together a short featuring Bob and Larry as a way to pitch the show to potential investors, but nobody was interested. It got to the point where Phil could barely afford food, and for the first time since his journey began, he doubted himself. He thought maybe God was wrong on this one. But according to Phil, he got this random check in the mail for $400 from some anonymous source and saw it as a sign to keep pushing forward. So he kept at it. He even got some advice from his mother about how to portray Christianity in the show. Number 1, do not portray Jesus as a vegetable. Good call, Phil's mom.
Jesus Christ, that's Jesus.
Number 2, try not to imply that the vegetables can have redemptive relationships with God. Don't show the vegetables praying unless they're playing the role of a historical or biblical figure. And number 3, try to communicate to kids how God made each one of them unique, and he loves them very much. She said, that is your most important message. That advice would serve Phil well as he pushed forward. But then, something amazing happened. Phil got $80,000 from a friend. Just a guy who was like, hey man, I really believe in what you're doing, and it needs to happen. Which is like, incredible. I mean, none of my friends have given me $80,000. To which, at that point, are they really even my friends? You know who you are. Well, strap in, folks. Things are about to take off for Phil. He got a chance to pitch his show to some Christian ministry that aired kids shows in the Middle East. This mysterious stranger from the ministry, who couldn't even reveal his name due to security reasons. Okay. Well, the guy struck a deal with Phil and said, we will pay you $110,000 in exchange for 11 episodes of VeggieTales. Boom. There it is. Phil finally secured funding. And now it was time to make a show.
Allow us to introduce ourselves.
1993, and the gauntlet has been thrown down. Phil and his team had to crunch out a 30-minute computer-animated cartoon before Christmas. A computer-animated show? Well, that's new, and would be very challenging. But Phil had the power of God and vegetables on his side. Okay, so what do we have to do? We need some animators. Okay, said Phil. So he hired Chris Olsen and Robert Ellis. Okay, boom, done. Next, we need some voice actors. Mike will voice half the cast. Why don't we just voice the characters? And maybe, I don't know, Lisa. Lisa, you can voice Junior. How about that? Okay, boom, done. Next, we need some music. How about this guy named Kurt Heineke, who works as the music director at our church and has zero experience working on shows? Now, as often as Phil would run into bad luck, this was a particular occasion where Phil was very lucky, because Kurt was amazing. And in August of 1993, Phil changed the name of GraphX Studios to Big Idea Productions. And he and his friends and his family were trying their best to hype up people for the arrival of VeggieTales. And would send out letters to other families and friends to get them pumped up. And honestly, real talk, that's kind of cute. Here's a letter in the mail of a cartoon cucumber that my son's making. Please watch it.
No.
But,
Oh no.
the Christmas deadline was quickly approaching, and by the skin of their teeth, the team was able to make their deadline. The first official episode of VeggieTales was completed.
Complete.
Phil had a policy in mind for VeggieTales: to make a Christian show that wasn't just good for Christian viewers, but for all viewers. And I truly believe that he achieved that. like I said at the start of the video, I knew non-Christian families who loved the show and would watch it all the time. That's truly a testament to the show. First off, the direction Big Idea went for the animation was brilliant. Focusing on the eyes and face of the models gave these characters such a massive edge when it came to expressions. So many expressions. Then there's the music. For a guy who was new to producing music for videos, Kurt absolutely knocked it out of the park. The songs in VeggieTales are, in my opinion, genuinely fantastic and still hold up to this very day. While researching this video, I listened to the soundtracks on Spotify and was like, whoa, wow, these songs are catchy. Silly Songs with Larry is legit some top-notch stuff. Then there's the writing. Sometimes the episodes had original stories, and sometimes they were reenacting stuff from the Bible.
The Bible? This is the Bible.
You question the words of the mighty Jimmy?
Regardless, the writing was always on point. It wasn't afraid to have fun, even with biblical content. VeggieTales was able to put its own original spin on these tales from the Bible. Even the dark stuff. Remember that story from the Bible when King David was envious of this soldier's wife and sent the guy to the front lines of a battle so he would die and David could hook up with his wife? The Bible's wild. Okay, well, VeggieTales used that plot for an episode. Instead of King David, you got Larry. And instead of a woman, he wants a rubber ducky from Junior. That being said, Larry still sent the kid off to go to war. And the poor kid came back with PTSD. You know, for kids.
Incoming! Boysenberry at 3 o'clock!
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
And of course, the characters are a lot of fun. Bob, Larry, Junior, Jimmy, Jerry, Pa Grape, Nezzy. They all have unique, interesting, and defined personalities that work well off each other. For example, Bob is the straight man, and Larry is the silly goof. Good stuff. That's a good dynamic. There are even adult jokes in this show. Now, they're not dirty, and they went over my head when I was a kid.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
Weed eater.
Like this bit with the IRS? And how this Peach was trying to claim Larry's cookies? As an adult, I find that hilarious. And there's also plenty of references to pop culture stuff, like Star Trek or The Holy Grail. As a matter of fact, I am very certain that the humor from Monty Python was a huge influence on Phil and Mike.
I fart in your general direction.
Overall, VeggieTales was more than just a show that used computer animation. It had strong writing, great characters, catchy music. Combine all of this with clever computer animation, and you had something that was truly one of a kind. And people were starting to notice. Phil was flown out to Nashville, Tennessee, to talk to a guy from a Christian music company called Word Records. In May of 1994, they struck a deal, and Word asked for 11 episodes, provided funding, and would be a distributor. Despite this investment of money, Big Idea was almost broke and was barely keeping its head above water, since costs were very high. In August of '94, the first 2 episodes of VeggieTales finally arrived in 750 Christian bookstores. Now, as far as world records go, VeggieTales was not the first half-hour-long CGI show. That was claimed by the Crash Test Dummies. But VeggieTales was the first CGI home video series, and the first CGI series of any kind produced in the United States. Now, despite being the first in a few categories, initial sales were very low, and people at Christian bookstores were not really going for it. Phil even considered at this point selling Big Idea. But then Phil's lawyer said, "Hey, I have a friend who wants to give you $50,000. But in exchange, he and I get to own a % of the company." Phil said in his book that the donor, and the friend of his lawyer, was jokingly called Mr. Silent, since he worked remotely. This guy would also step in to help with accounting at Big Idea. So the team was growing, And with this new cash, Phil even brought on 2 more animators, Tom Dannon and Ron Smith. Ron would go on to be a key player at Big Idea, and was the guy behind a future series at the studio called 321 Penguins. We'll talk about that in a bit. But now, it was early 1995. Sales were still pretty low, and Phil was feeling the burn. But this vegetable powder keg was about to explode. So, what caused VeggieTales to blow up in popularity? A key thing to remember is that VeggieTales was primarily sold in Christian bookstores. Unlike Walmart, the people who worked at these bookstores had more freedom to choose what they wanted to put on the TV. Well, it turns out that these young adults and college kids who worked at these bookstores really liked VeggieTales. They liked the animation, they liked the jokes. Phil even got letters from adults who were like, "Hey, my husband and I love your show. We even threw a VeggieTales themed party for our friends. By the way, we don't have kids." Phil was like, "Wait, what? Oh, looks like these cool college kids were eating their vegetables after all."
I said I don't want any damn vegetables.
All right, that's it, young man. No Bible stories for you tonight.
Oh.
And guess what? It was catching on. After that, Phil got a call from a company called Good Times Video, which was known for making terrible rip-offs of Disney films. They were like, "Hey, how about you dump these Christian distributors and get with us? We can sell you talking vegetables at Walmart, unlike them. But if you want to do that, you gotta tone down the Christian stuff." Phil thought it over, but ultimately turned them down. VeggieTales was his ministry, so taking God out of it would completely defeat the purpose. Phil kept his faith. Enter Bill Halgen. This larger-than-life 50-year-old guy who cursed like a sailor but prayed like a saint. He smoked cigars. He slammed down booze. He walked around in crazy suits with custom patchwork pants with clashing colors. The guy was an absolute Chad, and he was there to help Phil. He offered to do all of the business stuff that Phil was too busy to take care of. So Phil made Bill his vice president of licensing. By mid-1996, Big Idea was blowing up. Sales were finally exceeding expenses.
Nice.
And Phil decided to step away from animating and instead focus his efforts on more of a leadership role at the studio. Kind of like what Walt did for Disney. As a matter of fact, Walt was a massive inspiration to Phil. He admired Walt's creativity, his movies, his accomplishments. Phil wanted that. He desired to be the Christian Walt Disney. His words, not mine. 1997 would be an explosive year for Big Idea Productions. Videos were flying off the shelves and breaking records. And the merch! Books, clothes, costumes, puppets! And numbers were up across the board. Phil might have stepped down from animating, but he found himself incredibly busy, rubbing shoulders with big names in the industry, and getting hit up by companies who wanted a piece of that vegetable action. Now, a big part in our story, and I mean big, was the arrival of Dick Leach, the owner of Lyrick Studios, and the father of Barney the dinosaur. Phil really liked Dick. And appreciated that he was a man of conviction and principle. Lyrick distributed multiple franchises and would be a good pick for VeggieTales, since the previous distributors were becoming more and more unappealing with their questionable business practices. With Lyrick at Big Idea's back, they could become big. Like, really big. Despite the success of Big Idea around this time, drama was starting to flare up with the team. More people were being hired at the company, and the personalities were starting to clash. Also, the question came up, should the people we hire be Christian? This is a Christian ministry after all. Or is that too unreasonable? So the more people they hired, the less Christian Big Idea would become. Phil was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place with this one. He was afraid the Christian vibes of Big Idea might scare off employees. And to Phil, he hated the idea that others could mess up his life by leaving him.
Don't leave me.
But there was no time to worry about that. Phil had a dream, a vision, to take on the big, money-loving, unethical giants of the entertainment industry. Disney, Viacom, Warner Brothers. All of them soulless corporations who stood for nothing and did not care about the heart and soul of America. But Big Idea was sharpening its blade and was ready to offer a company that actually had morals and stood for something decent.
Phil allows himself to hope for more than glory, such mad hope. But there it is. Against a secular world, against all odds, we can do it. We can take down the corporations. We can win.
Phil wanted to make something truly significant, something that would outlast him. He thought, God wants me to make a great company. And Phil was ready to commit everything to that dream. His goal for Big Idea, to markedly enhance the moral and spiritual fabric of our culture through creative media, to build the most trusted of the top 4 family media brands within 20 years. Well, if you're aiming to do that, you probably need a CEO. So Phil brought on a business mentor of his, this guy who was previously a CEO of a billion-dollar insurance company. Phil was floored. Sales were going up. Videos were being sold at Walmart. Phil was being invited to speak at conferences and conventions. And Big Idea was getting a ton of press coverage. Heck, it was getting so good that other Christian companies tried to get a piece of that vegetable pie. Bible Man, Gaither's Pond, and of course, the critically acclaimed Joshua and the Promised Land.
No!
There would even be shows that would satirize VeggieTales, such as Drawn Together, SNL, and The Simpsons. That's when you know you really made it. Now, Phil had confidence in the growth of Big Idea. He was hungry and wanted to see his company get big fast. And since he was the majority shareholder, he had full control. So there was nothing to worry about, right? Right? The team was growing. Presidents, VPs, HR, PR, marketing. VeggieTales broke records in 1998 and sold over 6 million videos that year alone. It had become the best-selling Christian video series of all time. Phil felt invincible. Big Idea could truly take on the world and become a media empire. Something to rise up and challenge these unethical corporations. Literally nothing could go wrong. So here we are, the beginning of the end. Sure, things were looking good for Phil, but all of that was about to come crumbling down. And the canary in the coal mine? Mr. Silent. He said to Phil, "I'm concerned about the growth of the company. We're spending too much money." And Phil replied, by moving the location of Big Idea to a larger office. It was, after all, God's will. The studio was even catching the attention of Disney, since some of their own animators were quitting to go join Phil and his team. Yep, Mickey Mouse had officially noticed Bob and Larry.
"Oh, I'm gonna chop you up and put you in a salad and feed it to my dog, not Pluto. Goofy, that dog."
"Oh, you can stop calling me a dog. I'm a sentient creature."
But things were about to take an ugly turn. The staff started to fight more often. Marketing people were starting to tone down the Christian stuff on the Big Idea website in favor of a moral, active demographic. Christian employees were trying to witness and share the love of God with non-Christian employees, leaving Bible tracts at their desk.
Oh, I just don't like that. Mom!
HR did not like that. But Phil did not want to fire people. He did not want them to leave his life. Also, Phil mentioned that he wasn't having as much fun anymore. It was all business this, business that. He was stretched way too thin. And then treachery was abound. So it turns out that the president, CFO, and other executives of Big Idea were meeting behind closed doors, conducting business and estimating numbers without Phil's knowledge. Lines were officially being drawn in the sand. Phil and Mike were then about to make another critical mistake, creating a cinematic VeggieTales movie. It was called Jonah, and Phil and Mike thought it could work. Okay, so the passion's there. What about the finances? Kind of. We'll double back on this. Up until now, 1998, VeggieTales video sales were going up exponentially. But 1999 would be the year when sales would finally slow down by a considerable percent. In 98, sales increased by 200%. In 99, it was only 10%. And while the sales dipped, the staff only continued to increase in size, and expenses went up with it. They were paying for a larger staff, and the cost to make a single video of VeggieTales was now around $1 million. Uh-oh, is that the sound of a clock ticking?
It's time to stop!
The list of problems started to grow, and fast. Strap in, folks. This is about to get ugly. The suits of the company were pushing Phil more and more out of the picture. Meanwhile, employees were leaving Big Idea because it was too Christian, while other employees were leaving because it wasn't Christian enough. And then the cost of Jonah continued to rise. What they estimated to be around $7 million in production cost and $7 million in marketing would eventually cost more. Much more. And then this dream building that Phil was trying to secure for Big Idea in Lombard, Illinois, blew up in his face. They thought this building would cost around $10 million.
Psych!
It ended up costing $17 million. And the bank they were working with would only loan out $8 million. This, folks, in my opinion, was the first real big blow to Big Idea Productions. And it was only going to get worse. The project was canceled, and Big Idea lost $4 million in their investment for the building. Ouch. Phil then took a much-needed break after that, but came home to absolute chaos. It got to the point where Phil sat his executive team down and had a let's talk kind of meeting. It did not go over well, and the president of the company refused to talk to Phil until he apologized. Sales for Big Idea in 1999 totaled $38 million. In 2000, the executives were estimating $77 million. That was very optimistic. And worst of all, the estimated cost in 2000 were going to be around $73 million. And most of that was going toward non-animator jobs. Phil did not like that. In January of 2000, the numbers were in, and Big Idea missed their forecasted sales by 80%. And at that moment, Phil decided it was time to fire his president. The guy had been screwing Phil over for long enough. Also, a bunch of other executives were let go, or straight up left on their own accord. Phil was trying to clean out management, and in the process, he crunched some numbers, and then it dawned upon him. Things were really bad. Big Idea desperately needed money. It got to the point they were going to run out of money in only a few months. And they still needed money to finish their movie. But they were $20 million short of being able to complete it. So they reached out to their bank for help. The bank was willing to lend them a helping hand, but there would be certain stipulations. If Big Idea wanted that fat loan, they would have to be kept on track and meet certain numbers. If not, the bank could foreclose on the company. So Phil signed the agreement in August of 2000. 1 month later, and they were out of compliance, meaning the bank could shut Big Idea down. Right about now, you guys are probably thinking, this is the worst it gets.
but I'm not done yet.
In late 2000, the expenses for Big Idea were skyrocketing, and sales were also declining. Jonah was in production, and money was extremely tight. So tight that Phil had to cut down his staff yet again. All the executive people were practically gone by this point, except for a new president who stepped in temporarily. The new president did some number crunching, said that Big Idea would be out of money in 60 days, turned to Phil and said, "What did you do to VeggieTales?" Where are we on our oof counter? 2 so far? Well, there's number 3. Despite the cutbacks, it wasn't enough. And in May of 2001, Phil went forward with a massive layoff, and it broke his heart. He hated to see people go, but it was the only way to cut cost. Unfortunately, it still wasn't enough, and Phil was left with yet another hard decision. He could, 1, fire even more people and only do a VeggieTales episode once or twice a year, or B, throw a Hail Mary and hope that the Jonah movie is a huge success. To Phil, choosing option A would be akin to losing faith in God, and he wasn't about to do that. Phil and Mike also had the idea of doing a spin-off of VeggieTales called The Cartoon Adventures of Larry Boy, but it would be done in Flash to save time and money. By the way, Phil, if you're watching this, you said in your book that Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls were done in Flash. That was wrong! Who do you think you are? Yeah, get on my level. Get back to me when you have a YouTube channel.
I already have one.
Stupid! What have you ever done with your life except for making my childhood? Big Idea also launched another series called 321 Penguins that was headed by Chris Olsen, who, at this point, was essentially running the animation studio. The hope here was that Big Idea could leverage VeggieTales and use it to expand their brand with other shows. Guess what? Didn't work. A lot of fans didn't care for the visual style of Larry Boy, while 321 Penguins wasn't nearly as popular as VeggieTales, but cost almost just as much to make. That would be oof number 4. And then, as is the running theme in Phil's story, things got worse. So it turns out that Big Idea never officially signed the contracts to give distribution rights to Lyrick Studios. Instead, it was more of a verbal agreement, which meant the contract was not legally binding. Phil only signed up with Lyrick because he liked Dick. And knew he was a good man who kept his word. If anything about Lyrick ever freaked Phil out, he could walk away from it. Well, it just so happens that Dick was selling Lyrick to a company called Hit Entertainment, the corporation who owns Bob the Builder, Thomas and Friends, and a bunch of other kid franchises. And to make matters worse, there was no way for Phil to talk to Dick about it, because soon after, he died in a freak accident. Phil did not want to sell VeggieTales to Hit. But he also knew if Hit did not own said property, they would most likely not promote it as much as their own franchises. So, in early 2001, Phil made the decision to leave Lyrick and signed up with WEA instead, which was the music distribution company at Warner Brothers. Ironic. Phil wanted to stand against Warner, but now needed their help. They offered to advance enough money to Big Idea so they could finish Jonah, though they would eventually have to pay them back. And 10 days after announcing this deal with Warner, Hit Entertainment slapped Big Idea with a lawsuit.
Why you bullying me?
They were mad. But the lawsuit could wait. We gotta save Big Idea first. We have multiple ways to do this after all. There's the VeggieTales concert. Wait, never mind. That failed. Well, there's the merchandise. Shoot. That money belonged to the distributors. Well, what about the movie? Yes, the movie! Our Hail Mary of the VeggieTales arsenal. This will save the company, right? Folks, are you even surprised anymore? At this point, I think you know the answer. According to Phil, Jonah needed to make at least $18 million in order for Big Idea to walk away with a profit. With fingers crossed, Jonah was released in October of 2002 and made around $25 million at the box office. Now, half of that money went to the movie theaters, and the rest of it, well, it went to the company that marketed the film. So overall, Jonah was a financial failure, and it was not going to save the company. Couple this failure with the impending lawsuit and massive layoffs, and it should be no surprise, Phil wasn't in the best place mentally. He felt like he was losing his focus with his objective for Big Idea, and everything was coming undone, but he still had faith. Phil thought God was going to save Big Idea. Yeah, sure. It was now winter of 2002, and animators at the company were starting to leave. And instead, we're going to Blue Sky Studios to work on robots. Not the machines, the movie. Yeah, remember that film? It's got Robin Williams. But whatever, Big Idea had a bigger problem to deal with. The lawsuit. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to the endgame of our story. Now, Big Idea had already burned over $2 million on legal fees so far, and begged the CEO of HIT to settle out of court. He said, no, this guy was out for blood, and it was time for a court battle. In this corner, weighing over 10,000 pounds, Barney the dinosaur! And in this corner, weighing... Hold on, never mind, it's Bob the tomato! Now, fight! The case would go from 2002 to 2003 and took place in Dallas, Texas. During this time, the president of Big Idea left the company, and by April of 2003, only 65 people worked at Big Idea. On the back end, the video sales for Jonah were going well. Too bad Phil did not see a penny of it, since that money would go to distributors. But you know what? Hey, shut up. It's time for law stuff. Phil hated the court proceedings and found them dreadfully boring. His lawyer even told him, hey, Phil, try to look more interested. Well, the argument for HIT Entertainment and their ownership of Lyrick boiled down to this. There's actually 3 main points. 1. Even though there was not an officially signed agreement, there was a binding agreement based on the original offer letter between Big Idea and Lyrick. That, since the offer letter was signed by Dick, and the return correspondence from Big Idea carried a signature on a fax cover sheet, that those documents, taken together, constituted the binding relationship, even though Dick's letter clearly said, quote, there would be no binding relationship until a formal agreement was signed. 2. Lyrick's lawyers made the argument that the wording on the potential contract said, quote, approval of which Big Idea will not unreasonably withhold, and said that Big Idea was walking away from Lyrick and HIT because Phil was being greedy, that he was leaving only because he wanted more money, and that was it, and that was not a reasonable cause to walk away. They admitted that Big Idea had the right to approve of HIT's purchase of Lyrick, but that they, quote, unreasonably withheld approval. And finally, HIT's lawyers made the argument that Big Idea had given HIT DVD rights to all of Big Idea's videos, even though the contract only said video cassettes only. Their evidence? Big Idea sent 2 videos on DVD for Lyrick to use for test audiences only. The lawyers for HIT pointed to the DVDs and noted the logo of Lyrick on said covers. See, they said, they gave us DVD rights.
Marriage is binding, and that makes me king, see?
Phil thought that all of these arguments were completely stupid, to which they were. It was a total stretch of logic. But that's corporate law for you. But this brings us to the final death blow for Big Idea. They lost. The judge and jury agreed with the lawyers from Lyrick and HIT and gave them everything. $11 million in damages, payment for legal fees, and of course, Big Idea itself. 14 years of Phil's life work was ripped from his arms in an instant. Despite losing in court, Phil was determined to keep Big Idea together as one entity. He pulled a 363 bankruptcy sale, which was a way to keep the company together and operate as one instead of being stripped for parts and sold separately. That was a smart move. So, in 2003, there was an auction for Big Idea between companies, and a bidding war ensued. The winner, a company called Classic Media, with a purchase of $19.6 million. Now Bob, Larry, the entire VeggieTales cast no longer belonged to Phil. Sadly, the pain for Phil did not end there. He got angry letters from fans and from ex-employees. And ultimately, he asked himself, why? Why would God bring a dream to life only to see it die? For the record, I am going to approach the following from Phil's perspective and beliefs, so keep that in mind. Over time, Phil realized that he made a false idol out of Big Idea, that he was too obsessed with becoming big and doing it quickly, that in the shuffle of it all, he lost focus on his ministry and God. Phil's original plan was to do what he was doing for God. But according to him, he lost sight of that and only cared about his own dreams. In his book, Phil says, quote, "Beware your dreams." And his personal dream was to become the next Christian Walt Disney, to provide a strong option for people who want to watch movies and shows from a company with strong ethics. He had tunnel vision, and in the process of reaching for the stars, he fell. He fell hard. And you want to hear the most soul-crushing part of it all? You're not ready for this. The irony. In August of 2005, the verdict for the Lyrick lawsuit was overturned in federal appeals court. But by that time, it was too late. The damage had been done. Big Idea had already been sold off, and there was no way for Phil to get it back. Hey, what did I say? You know what? I told you all. This was going to be a sad story. Well, guess what? The story does not end there. But before we move on, let's do a quick recap of the main things that went wrong for Phil and brought the original run of VeggieTales to its knees. Number 1, high cost. Big Idea spent a lot of money and hired way too many people. Folks, money is the name of the game, and Big Idea, for the majority of its run, always seems short on it. Number 2, poor management. Phil admits that he does not care for being the CEO or president of a company and would rather pass that off to other experienced people. Well, that backfired because these people did not have the same goals as Phil's in mind. Instead, they had unreasonable goals that would eventually sink the company. Number 3, the movie. This was a bad idea from the get-go. It was way too much, way too soon, especially with the other problems in the mix. It took away manpower, it cost a ton of money. And here's the thing, the movie itself wasn't bad. If only Big Idea could have waited a few more years, then maybe the movie might have been a success. Number 4, distributors. I feel that out of all of the problems I've listed so far, this one was the most out of Phil's hands. He played by the rules and had an understanding with a guy who was cool with him. But then that guy died, and the new owners went for Phil's throat. In hindsight, maybe he should have signed a contract that he found suitable with Lyrick, instead of letting things be. If he did, it definitely would have helped him in court. But ultimately, Phil blames himself. He said that his strengths built Big Idea, but his weaknesses brought it down. That he was too eager to go big, and that was his undoing. Well, you can't say he doesn't own up to it. Despite the lawsuit, bankruptcy, and auction, this was not the end for VeggieTales. You see, Classic Media was now the new owner, and oh, wait, hold on. I'm wrong. They were bought by DreamWorks. Wait, no, hold on. They got bought by NBC Universal. Oh, wait, they were bought by COMCAST. What just happened? So, technically, COMCAST owns VeggieTales. Huh. Well, VeggieTales would eventually find itself on TV in a show called VeggieTales on TV. It was repackaged episodes of the original VeggieTales, and it ran from 2006 to 2009 on a channel called Kubo. Okay. It was even the top Saturday morning cartoon during its run. But this was also the time when the new owners started to downplay God in the show. I actually got to ask Phil about this, and he said, quote, "I was upset when an NBC deal resulted in the classic episodes being de-godded, because I had been told that wouldn't happen, and I was involved in that project. I stepped aside when it became clear the shows needed to be secularized." Heck, I mean, there were religious groups that were fuming that they were taking God out of VeggieTales. One member said, quote,
"The series is successful because of its biblical worldview, not in spite of it. That's the signature to VeggieTales."
End quote. Honestly, you know what? That's a fair point. The show did start off as Christian after all. But then things got weird with the Netflix series. Both of them. VeggieTales in the House in 2014, and then VeggieTales in the City in 2017. Phil and Mike still worked on the shows as voice actors, but that was it. Instead of them, the series was led under the command of Doug TenNapel. Buddy, I don't even know how to say your name, but I don't really care. He was the guy who was the creator of Earthworm Jim. Not my first choice, nor my 87th. Both of these series featured redesigns of the characters, as the characters had more, anime eyes, I guess?
Bob-san, where's my hairbrush?
Also, the stories and writing weren't nearly as sharp. Overall, I did not care for In the House or In the City. And it just proves that Phil and Mike really knew what they were doing originally. And let me tell you, the VeggieTales fandom did not care for these reboots either. I found this crazy forum post from like 2014 that said the following, quote,
"No one in this series is cute. Even Larry, the cucumber I've been crushing on since I was 8, looks like what comes out of your butt if you eat too much green stuff."
Really? It's Larry? Larry's hot? Larry's your crush? Well, that's a new one. Oh, by the way, someone replied to this and said, quote,
"You're gonna burn in hell for the rant you made."
Oh man, these fans go hard. Despite the crushing defeats that Phil suffered throughout the years, there was a silver lining. He got a second chance. In March of 2019, it was announced that the broadcasting rights to VeggieTales was picked up by Trinity Broadcasting Network, a Christian-based television network. They wanted VeggieTales to return to its original format, and also wanted Phil to be a writer and director on the show. Heck, they got the old band back together. Phil, Mike, Lisa, Kurt. It was like seeing old friends again. The show is called The VeggieTales Show, and the first episode was released in late 2019. I watched it, and it feels a lot like the Muppets, with how they put on a show, and Kermit's running around backstage with his clipboard, trying to keep things in line. It's like that, but with VeggieTales. The writing is familiar, the jokes are funny, the characters look much better, and overall, I dig it. Again, Phil and his team brought something unique to the table when they were originally making VeggieTales. So it's really good to see them back on the show. Oh, and by the way, the first episode is about making peace. And at the end of the show, Bob straight up apologizes to the rest of the VeggieTales for letting them down and asks them to forgive him. If that is not a metaphor, then I don't know what is. So, in conclusion, after sharing this long story of success and failure, I have to say this. I both pity and respect Phil. This truly was a story about a man who was original and brilliant, how he built something amazing, but unfortunately flew too close to the sun and came crashing down. And here's the thing, he admits it, which is refreshing since most people don't like to admit their mistakes. And considering all things, VeggieTales was a pretty groundbreaking show and was very good during its original run. I rewatched it while working on this video, and the show absolutely holds up despite its old animation. It's truly a testament that VeggieTales was built on creative animation, great characters and writing, and very catchy music. It was more than just Christian vegetables or early CG animation. It was one of a kind, and that is why it became a global phenomenon. Honestly, it makes me wonder what could have been if Phil could have stayed in charge. But in hindsight, it sounds like things played out in a way that ultimately worked out in Phil's favor. He sounded miserable during the late 90s and early 2000s, and seems much more happy now. I suppose all's well that ends well. Again, I have a lot of respect for Phil. I know not everyone is on the same page when it comes to religious content, but I see Phil as a genuine guy who meant well. He never struck me as arrogant or mean-spirited, just a guy who was clever with his creations, but was taken for a ride while reaching for the stars. Props to Phil for admitting his faults, learning from them, and moving on. That takes guts. Overall, I hope more people will see the original VeggieTales in a better light and realize how much of a footprint it left on the history of animation. And all thanks to a nerdy kid and his religious vegetables.
Well, we're out of time for today, but remember,
God made you special, and he loved you very much.
Bye!
Bamboo!
Speaking of which, where are my God-fearing vegetables?
Where's Larry? Oh, God. I have to use that, actually.